The firebase had gone silent at 4:47 hours. Command tried 3 times to raise them on the SAT link. Nothing. Just the hiss of static and the kind of silence that made seasoned operators check their weapons twice. The outpost sat in a valley so remote it didn't have a name on most maps, just a grid reference that intelligence analysts had flagged 6 months prior. 32 Marines, one rifle company, surrounded by hostiles who'd spent the last 72 hours tightening the noose. The last transmission came through garbled, breaking up over dying batteries and whatever interference the mountains threw into the mix. 6 words: contact heavy, ammunition critical, need extract. Then nothing. At Bagram, the Joint Operations Center looked like organized chaos. Officers stood around illuminated screens showing topography that might as well have been the surface of Mars. The valley was a kill-box. Surface-to-air threats lit up the intelligence board like a Christmas tree. Shoulder-fired missiles. Heavy machine guns dug into elevated positions. At least 2 technical vehicles with mounted anti-aircraft guns. The weather wasn't helping either. Cloud ceiling dropping fast. Visibility approaching zero. Every helicopter pilot in theater had already said the same thing: suicide mission. The fast movers couldn't get low enough through the clouds without hitting granite. The rotary wing couldn't survive the gauntlet. A full colonel, the kind whose chest salad told stories of 3 wars, stood with his arms crossed, staring at the map like he could burn a path through it with his eyes alone. "We're out of time," he said quietly. "Those Marines have maybe 2 hours of ammunition left. After that," he didn't finish. He didn't have to. That's when the radio crackled. "Bagram TOC, this is Hog 2-1 requesting immediate tactical frequency and updated hostile positions for grid November Victor 7422. The voice was calm, almost casual, like she was ordering coffee instead of volunteering to fly into hell. The operations officer looked up sharply. "Hog 2-1, be advised, mission is no-go. Repeat, no-go. SAM threat is unacceptable. We have no suppression assets available." A pause. "Copy your assessment, Bagram. I'm wheels up in 4 minutes. Send me everything you have." The colonel walked over to the console, took the handset himself. "Hog 2-1, this is actual. Who am I talking to?" Another pause, longer this time, filled with the whine of turbines spooling up somewhere in the background noise. "Call sign Revenant, sir. I've got 30mm and a full load. Those Marines need close air support and I'm the only asset in range. I'm going in." The operations center went still. Revenant. Everyone in theater knew that call sign. Most had heard the stories. Some believed them. Others thought they were barrack tales told by crew chiefs with too much time and too little to do. But the name meant something. It meant someone who died once already and refused to stay down. It meant a pilot who flew an A-10 Thunderbolt like it was part of her nervous system, who could put rounds through a window at 400 knots, who'd taken so much ground fire on previous tour that maintenance crews joked her aircraft had more patches than original skin. Her real name was Cade Merrick. Captain, 29 years old, 3rd deployment. Before the Air Force, she'd been a crop duster in Montana, flying low and tight over wheat fields in aircraft held together with baling wire and optimism. Her father taught her to fly before she could legally drive. He'd been a Warthog pilot himself, back in the first Gulf War, and he'd died when his plane augured into the desert during a training mission when Cade was 16. She joined up the day she turned 18, scored perfect on every qualification. Made captain faster than almost anyone in her year group. But there was something else about Cade Merrick that the records didn't show. 2 years ago, she'd been shot down over similar terrain. Spent 4 days evading capture with a broken collarbone and a dislocated shoulder before a rescue team pulled her out. She'd refused medical discharge, refused the desk job they offered, refused to let fear dictate her choices. Instead, she went back to flight school on her own dime, requalified on the A-10, and requested immediate redeployment to a combat zone. The brass thought she had a death wish. Her squadron thought she was trying to prove something. Neither group understood that Cade wasn't running toward death or away from fear. She was running toward the people who needed her most, the ones who couldn't run at all. Now, as she climbed into the cockpit of Hog 2-1, The sky above Bagram was beginning to lighten with false dawn. The A-10 sat on the flight line like a mechanical gargoyle, ugly and purpose-built, its 7-barrel GAU-8 Avenger cannon protruding from the nose like the stinger of some prehistoric wasp. 30-millimeter rounds, depleted uranium cores, 70 rounds per second. The Warthog wasn't fast or pretty, but it was built around that gun, armored like a tank, redundant in every system, designed to take punishment and keep flying. Cade ran through her pre-flight checks with the efficiency of someone who'd done this so many times the movements were muscle memory. Fuel, hydraulics, flight controls, weapons systems, everything green. She pulled on her helmet, adjusted the oxygen mask, felt the familiar weight of the gear settle onto her shoulders. Her crew chief, a staff sergeant named Riordan who'd been with her for 18 months, climbed up on the ladder. "Ma'am, I heard the brief. That valley is locked down tight. You sure about this?" Cade looked at him through the tinted visor, her expression unreadable. "Those Marines don't have a choice, Sergeant. Neither do I." Riordan nodded slowly, understanding something that went beyond words. He tapped the canopy rail twice. "Then you bring this bird back, Captain. She's the best one we've got." Cade allowed herself a small smile. "I always do." The canopy came down with a hydraulic hiss. Cade throttled up, felt the twin turbofan engine spool from idle to full military power. The A-10 began to roll, slow and heavy, loaded with ordnance that turned it into a flying weapons platform. As she lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, the lights of Bagram fell away behind her, replaced by the vast emptiness of the Hindu Kush, dark mountains cutting jagged silhouettes against a sky just beginning to blush with morning. The flight toward the valley took 38 minutes. Cade flew low, hugging terrain, using valleys and ridgelines to mask her approach. The A-10 wasn't stealthy, but it was small enough and flew low enough that most radar systems struggled to acquire it among the ground clutter. She monitored 3 radios simultaneously: tactical frequency for ground coordination, guard frequency for emergencies, and the ops channel connecting her back to Bagram. The weather forecast had been accurate. Cloud cover dropped to less than 800 feet, visibility maybe 2 miles, and that was generous. Rain started to spatter against the canopy as she crossed into hostile territory. The radar warning receiver stayed quiet, but Cade knew that didn't mean much. Most of the threats she faced wouldn't show up on RWR. Shoulder-fired missiles didn't emit until they launched. Heavy machine guns didn't emit at all. She'd be flying into a shooting gallery, where the only warning would be tracers cutting through the air, or the sudden bang of a round punching through her fuselage. At 15 minutes out, Cade switched to the tactical frequency. "Any call sign, this is Hog 2-1 approaching from the northeast. If you can hear this transmission, pop smoke to mark your position." Static. She waited, counting seconds, then tried again. "Firebase, this is Hog 2-1 with close air support. I'm coming in hot. Need you to mark your position. Acknowledge." More static. Then a voice, young and strained, broke through. "Hog 2-1, this is Anvil 6 Actual. We read you. Jesus, we read you." Popping green smoke in 30 seconds. "Be advised, we are danger close on all sides. Enemy is within 50 meters of our perimeter in multiple locations. We are almost black on ammunition." The voice belonged to a lieutenant, probably his first deployment, definitely his first time in a situation this bad. Cade could hear the controlled panic underneath the professional veneer. She'd been there herself. "Anvil 6, copy, danger close. I'll make my first pass north to south. Keep your heads down and trust the Hog. We're going to get you out." She crested the final ridgeline and the valley opened up below her. Even through the rain and low clouds, she could see the firebase, a small collection of HESCO barriers and sandbag positions arranged in a rough circle on a slight rise. Green smoke billowed up from the center, immediately whipped away by wind. Surrounding the position, muzzle flashes sparkled like angry fireflies. Small arms, heavy machine guns. At least 3 technical vehicles positioned on higher ground, pouring fire down into the Marines. The enemy had them boxed in completely. Cade's jaw tightened. She armed her cannon, selected her first target, a technical on the western ridge, and pushed the stick forward. The A-10 dropped like a predatory bird, nose angling down, the world outside the canopy accelerating into sharp focus. Altitude unwinding fast. 500 feet, 400, 300. The ground rushed up to meet her. At 200 feet, traveling just under 300 knots, Cade squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared to life with a sound like the world tearing apart. A deep, resonant BRRRRT that vibrated through the airframe and made the entire aircraft shudder. Tracers arced out ahead of her, bright orange lines connecting her aircraft to the target. Every fifth round was a tracer. The other four were invisible death. The technical vehicle on the western ridge disintegrated. Metal and bodies flew apart as 30-millimeter rounds, each the size of a beer bottle, chewed through engine blocks and flesh with equal indifference. The secondary explosion sent a fireball climbing into the rain. Cade pulled back hard on the stick, the A-10's nose pitching up, G-forces pressing her into the seat as she climbed back into the relative safety of cloud cover. Anvil 6, Hog 2-1. Splash 1 technical, Western Ridge. Assessing damage and repositioning. The lieutenant's voice came back, stronger now, energized by hope. Good hits, good hits. We still have heavy contact from the north and east. 2 more technicals and infantry in the tree line. Cade banked hard, her eyes scanning instruments and windows simultaneously. The RWR suddenly chirped. A spike. Someone had painted her with targeting radar. Probably the remaining technical vehicles trying to acquire her for their mounted guns. She dove again, this time approaching from the east, using a narrow canyon to mask her approach until the last possible second. This was the kind of flying that separated the good pilots from the dead ones. At these altitudes, with this terrain, any mistake would be instantly fatal. The mountains didn't care about training or skill or determination. They killed with absolute impartiality. But Cade had grown up flying through mountain passes, had learned to read terrain the way most people read books, and she'd spent 2 years since her shoot on studying every mission report, every casualty report, every lesson learned document she could find. She emerged from the canyon mouth doing 280 knots, barely clearing the treetops, the A-10's titanium bathtub protecting her from ground fire as rounds began to spark off her underside. The second technical was firing directly at her, tracers reaching up like fingers trying to swat her from the sky. Cade didn't flinch. She put the pipper directly on target and fired again. Another burst from the Avenger. Another BRRRRT that announced her presence like thunder. The vehicle exploded, flipping sideways and tumbling down the hillside in a shower of debris. But this time, Cade felt the hit, a thump that reverberated through the airframe. Warning lights illuminated on her caution panel, hydraulic pressure dropping in the number 2 system, engine temperature climbing. She'd taken ground fire somewhere in the belly or wing root and something important was bleeding. She keyed her mic. Bagram Hog 2-1, I'm hit. Hydraulics and engine issues. Continuing mission. The operations officer's voice came back immediately. Hog 2-1, recommend immediate egress for emergency landing. Closest divert field is Jalalabad, bearing 090, 90 nautical miles. Cade checked her instruments. Hydraulic pressure still falling. Engine temperature still climbing. If she left now, she'd probably make it. Probably. Negative, Bagram. Marines are still in contact. I've got 1 more gun run in me. The operations center at Bagram erupted in controlled chaos. The colonel grabbed the handset again. Revenant, this is actual. I'm ordering you to break off and recover. That's a direct order. Silence on the radio. Then Cade's voice, calm and steady with an edge of steel underneath. Sir, with respect, if I leave now, those Marines die. I can't live with that. Request permission to complete the mission. The colonel stared at the radio like it had betrayed him. Around him, officers and NCOs stood frozen, listening to a drama play out in real time hundreds of miles away. The major next to him, a career intelligence officer who'd never heard anything like this, whispered, Sir, she's going to get herself killed. The colonel's face was stone. I know. He keyed the mic 1 more time. Revenant, Hog 2-1, complete the mission. God be with you. In the cockpit, Cade felt something release in her chest. Not relief exactly, but acknowledgement. She'd been given permission to do what she was going to do anyway. She banked the wounded A-10 around for her final run. The firebase was still under intense fire. The Marines had consolidated their position, pulling back into a tighter defensive circle as their ammunition dwindled. Cade could see them now, tiny figures moving between sandbags, firing disciplined bursts, holding the line. The 3rd Technical had moved position, trying to flank from the north, and infantry were advancing behind it, using the vehicle as mobile cover. This was the critical moment. If that Technical and those troops broke through, the firebase would be overrun in minutes. Cade armed her Maverick missiles, 2 remaining on her outer pylons, and selected the first one. The targeting system locked on. She fired. The missile leapt off the rail, motor igniting with a brilliant flash, accelerating toward the target with single-minded determination. It struck the Technical dead center, the warhead detonating with enough force to lift the entire vehicle off the ground. The explosion consumed the infantry advancing behind it, shock wave flattening trees and scattering bodies like leaves. Anvil 6, Hog 2-1, Splash 3, you should have some breathing room. The lieutenant's response was nearly drowned out by cheering in the background. Hog 2-1, outstanding. Enemy is breaking contact. Repeat, enemy is withdrawing. Cade allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. The engine temperature had climbed into the red. The caution panel looked like a Christmas tree. She'd lost most of her hydraulic pressure now, which meant her flight controls were operating on backup systems that could fail at any moment. The A-10 was flying, but it was flying angry, protesting every input, every maneuver. She climbed slowly, carefully, trying to gain enough altitude to glide to safety if the engine quit. Behind her, the valley was falling silent. The firebase had survived. The Marines would make it home. That was all that mattered. Cade turned east, toward Jalalabad, and started counting miles. Each one felt like a victory. Each one reminded her why she flew. She made it 62 miles before the engine failed completely. One moment it was running rough. The next it seized with a grinding shudder that sent vibrations through the entire airframe. The cockpit went quiet except for the wind noise. The A-10 became a glider, heavy and ungainly, dropping through the sky at 1,000 feet per minute. Cade ran through emergency procedures automatically, muscle memory taking over while her conscious mind calculated angles and distances. Jalalabad was too far. She wasn't going to make it. The terrain below was unforgiving. Mountains, valleys, no roads, no clearings large enough for an emergency landing. She had maybe 4 minutes before she'd have to punch out, ejecting from the aircraft and taking her chances with the landing. But something in her resisted. The A-10 had gotten her this far. It had saved those Marines. It deserved better than to crash into a mountainside unnamed and forgotten. Cade scanned the landscape, searching for options that didn't exist, and then she saw it. A dry riverbed, maybe 200 meters long, relatively flat, running east-west through a narrow valley. It wasn't a runway. It was barely suitable for a controlled crash, but it was something. Cade adjusted her glide path, aiming for the riverbed, trading altitude for distance. The A-10 responded sluggishly, the backup hydraulic system struggling to move the control surfaces. She was coming in too fast, but she had no choice. At 500 feet, she dropped the landing gear manually, using the emergency extension system. The gear came down and locked with a reassuring thunk. At 200 feet, she could see rocks in the riverbed, could see how narrow it really was, could see all the ways this was going to go wrong. At 50 feet, traveling way too fast, she pulled back on the stick and flared. The A-10's nose pitched up. The tail struck first, sparks flying. Then the main gear hit, the impact violent enough to rattle Cade's teeth. The aircraft bounced, came down again, harder this time. Cade stood on the brakes. The A-10 skidded, fishtailed, the right wing dipping dangerously low. For a moment it seemed like the aircraft would cartwheel, would flip and tumble and disintegrate. But the wing caught, steadied, and the A-10 slid to a grinding, shrieking halt maybe 20 meters from the end of the riverbed. Silence, profound and complete. Cade sat in the cockpit, hands still gripping the stick, breathing hard. She was alive. The aircraft was wrecked but intact. She'd done it. She keyed her radio, surprised to find it still working. Bagram, Hog 2-1, I'm down but safe. Aircraft is. Well, it's not flying again, but I walked away. Request search and rescue grid to follow. The operations center erupted in cheers loud enough that she could hear them through the radio. The colonel's voice came through, and for the first time since the mission started, she heard genuine emotion in it. Hog 2-1, Revenant. Outstanding work. SAR is already en route. ETA 20 minutes. You just saved 32 Marines and gave us all something to believe in. Cade popped the canopy, fresh air rushing in, cool and clean despite the dust and smoke. She unbuckled, climbed out onto the wing and looked at her aircraft. The tail was crumpled. The right wing had a massive hole in it. The fuselage was peppered with bullet holes, and yet it had flown. It had brought her home. She patted the battered metal, a gesture of respect and gratitude, and then she sat down on the wing to wait. The sun was rising now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. It was going to be a beautiful day. 20 minutes later, the rescue helicopter appeared over the ridge, rotors beating the air into submission. They landed 50 meters away, rotor wash kicking up dust and loose stones. A pararescue jumper ran toward her, medical kit in hand, expecting casualties. Instead, he found Cade sitting calmly on the wing of her destroyed aircraft, helmet in her lap, watching the sunrise. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She looked at him and smiled. "No, I'm good. Just needed a minute." Back at Bagram, the story spread faster than radio waves. By the time Cade arrived, limping slightly from a bruised knee but otherwise unhurt, half the base had turned out to see her. Maintenance crews, pilots, ground personnel, even the cooks from the mess hall. They stood in loose groups, watching as the helicopter touched down and she stepped out. Someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping, a wave of sound that washed over the flight line. Cade wasn't used to this kind of attention. She'd always been the quiet one, the competent one, the one who did her job and didn't make a fuss about it. But as she walked through the crowd toward the operations center, people reached out to touch her shoulder, to shake her hand, to simply be near someone who'd done something they all aspired to do. The colonel met her at the entrance. He was a tall man, graying at the temples, with eyes that had seen too many wars and lost too many people. He extended his hand. "Captain Merrick, that was some flying." Cade took his hand, squeezed it firmly. "Just doing my job, sir." The colonel shook his head slowly. "No, that was more than a job. That was a miracle wrapped in 30mm rounds and pure stubbornness." He gestured toward his office. "I need to debrief you, but I wanted to say thank you first. Those Marines, some of them are friends of mine. You brought them home." Cade felt something tighten in her throat. She swallowed it down. "They would have done the same for me, sir. That's how this works." The debriefing took 3 hours. Cade walked them through every decision, every maneuver, every moment from takeoff to crash landing. The intelligence officers took notes. The operations staff updated their tactical assessments. The maintenance chief shook his head in disbelief when she described the damage the A-10 had sustained and still continued flying. When it was over, when the last question had been asked and answered, the colonel leaned back in his chair. "Captain, I'm putting you in for a Silver Star. You earned it." Cade started to protest, then stopped. She recognized that this wasn't about her ego or her humility. This was about recognition, about telling the story, about making sure that other pilots understood what was possible when you refused to accept the word impossible. "Thank you, sir. I'd be honored." The colonel nodded. "Now go get some rest. You look like hell." Cade smiled. "Feel like it too, sir." She left the operations center and walked across the base toward her quarters. The sun was fully up now, burning away the last traces of dawn, promising another brutal, beautiful day in the combat zone. People still stopped her, still thanked her, still wanted to know the details. She was patient with all of them, understanding that her story had become their story, that in some small way she'd given them hope. But underneath the gratitude and the adrenaline and the relief, Cade felt something else. She felt the weight of the choice she'd made. She'd gambled her life on a mission that could have easily killed her. She disobeyed a direct order, or at least delayed following it, in order to complete the objective. Some people would call that heroism. Others would call it recklessness. Cade wasn't sure which it was. Maybe both. Maybe neither. All she knew was that when she closed her eyes, she saw those Marines surrounded, fighting for their lives, and she knew she'd made the right choice. That night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Cade walked out to the flight line. Her A-10, what was left of it, had been recovered and brought back to Bagram on a heavy-lift helicopter. It sat in a corner of the maintenance area, broken and battered, surrounded by crew chiefs and mechanics who were already stripping it for parts. The aircraft would never fly again, but pieces of it would live on in other warthogs, keeping them in the fight. Cade stood looking at it for a long time, remembering. Riordan, her crew chief, found her there. He walked up quietly, stood beside her, said nothing for a while. Finally, he spoke. "She was a good bird, ma'am." "The best," Cade agreed. "She saved those Marines as much as I did." Riordan nodded. "You know, when I first got assigned to your crew, people told me you were different, that you flew like you had something to prove." Cade glanced at him. "And now," he smiled, "now I think you just fly like someone who understands what's at stake. Most pilots, they're good, they're skilled, they follow procedures, but you fly like every mission might be the last mission, like every person on the ground is someone you know personally. That's rare, ma'am, that's special." Cade felt the tightness in her throat return. "My father taught me that. He used to say that the A-10 isn't just a weapon system, it's a promise. A promise to the people on the ground that someone up there is watching out for them, that they're not alone, that someone will come when they need it most. I'm just keeping that promise." Riordan was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your father would be proud, ma'am." Cade nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They stood together in the darkness, two people who understood that machines and missions were ultimately about something simpler and more profound. The bonds between warriors, the promise to never leave anyone behind, the refusal to let fear dictate choices. Over the following weeks, as Cade recovered and returned to flight status in a new aircraft, the story of her mission spread beyond Bagram. It reached other bases, other units, other branches. The Marines she'd saved sent her a unit coin and a handwritten letter thanking her for their lives. News media picked up the story, though the details were classified and the reports were vague. Aviation forums debated the tactics she'd used. Flight schools began teaching her mission as a case study in close air support under adverse conditions. But for Cade, the most meaningful recognition came from her fellow A-10 pilots. They understood, in a way that others couldn't, exactly what she'd done. They knew the risks she'd taken, the skill required, the sheer audacity of flying into that valley with weather and terrain and enemy fire all conspiring to kill her. They knew that she'd been offered an out, a legitimate reason to turn back, and she'd refused it. And they knew that she'd brought her aircraft home, or close enough, when any reasonable analysis said she should have ejected. One evening in the squadron bar, an informal gathering place where pilots decompressed and told stories and built the camaraderie that sustained them through deployments, a senior captain named Halstead raised his beer. "To Revenant," he said simply, "who reminded us all why we fly these ugly beasts." The room erupted in agreement. Glasses clinked, people cheered, and Cade, sitting in the corner, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. Not because she'd done something heroic, though she had, but because she'd done it for the right reasons, in the right way, with the right spirit. The deployment eventually ended, as all deployments do. Cade rotated back to the States, back to a stateside squadron where the missions were training flights and the threats were simulated. It should have felt safe, comfortable, easy. Instead, it felt hollow. She'd tasted something in that valley, something that went beyond adrenaline or danger or even purpose. She'd tasted the absolute clarity of a moment where everything mattered, where every decision carried weight, where skill and courage and determination were the only things standing between life and death. Civilian life didn't offer that. Peacetime flying didn't offer that. Nothing else in the world offered that. She started volunteering for every deployment opportunity, every chance to get back to theater, to get back into the fight. Her commanding officers noticed. Her squadron mates noticed. Some of them worried that Cade was chasing something unhealthy, that she was addicted to combat or running from trauma. But others, the ones who'd been there themselves, understood differently. They understood that Cade had found her purpose in that valley, had found the thing she was meant to do, and everything else was just waiting. 6 months after returning stateside, Cade was offered a position as an instructor pilot at the Air Force Weapons School, the most prestigious assignment an A-10 pilot could receive. It was a career maker, a guarantee of promotion, a chance to shape the next generation of close air support pilots. She turned it down. Instead, she requested reassignment to a forward-deployed squadron, one that spent more time overseas than stateside, one that was perpetually in the fight. Her commander called her into his office, closed the door, and asked her directly, "Cade, what are you trying to prove?" She thought about that question for a long time before answering. "Nothing, sir. I'm not trying to prove anything. I just know where I belong, and it's not behind a desk or in a classroom. It's in a cockpit flying cover for people who need it. That's where I'm most useful. That's where I'm most myself." The commander studied her face, looking for signs of instability or obsession. He found neither. What he found was certainty, the kind of bone-deep understanding that couldn't be taught or explained, only earned. "All right," he said finally. "I'll approve the request, but Cade, promise me something. Promise me you'll come back when it's time. Don't let this consume you. Don't let it become the only thing that defines you." Cade met his eyes. "I promise, sir, but right now it's not consumption, it's contribution, and I have more to give." The reassignment went through. 3 months later, Cade was back in theater, back in the cockpit, back in the sky over hostile territory. She flew mission after mission, each one adding to her legend, each one reinforcing her reputation. Other pilots requested to fly with her. Ground units requested her call sign specifically when they needed close air support. The brass stopped questioning her choices and started using her as an example. But Cade never saw herself as legendary or heroic. She saw herself as a tool, perfectly suited to a specific task, doing what she was designed to do. The A-10 wasn't elegant. It wasn't fast, it wasn't stealthy, but it was effective, it was reliable, it was there when you needed it. Cade felt the same way about herself. Years passed. Deployments stacked up. Cade made major, then lieutenant colonel. She accumulated decorations. The Silver Star from that first mission, followed by distinguished flying crosses, air medals, Purple Hearts from the injuries she collected along the way. Her logbook filled with combat hours that dwarfed most pilots' entire careers. And through it all, she maintained the same steady professionalism, the same quiet competence, the same absolute commitment to the people on the ground. She became, without ever seeking it, the embodiment of what the A-10 represented: ugly, uncompromising, and utterly essential. Other pilots came and went, rotating through deployments and assignments, building careers and families. Cade stayed. She became a constant, a fixture, a presence that defined what it meant to fly close air support. Young pilots grew up hearing stories about Revenant, about the pilot who'd flown into impossible situations and emerged victorious, who'd been shot down and walked back to base, who'd landed a crippled aircraft on a riverbed and walked away. Some of the stories were true. Some were embellished. All of them captured something essential about who Cade was and what she represented. But the years took their toll, not on her skills, which if anything grew sharper with experience, but on her body. The ejections and the crashes and the sustained G-forces and the sheer physical punishment of combat flying accumulated into chronic pain and injuries that wouldn't fully heal. Her flight surgeon started making noises about medical retirement. Her commanding officers started suggesting staff positions, comfortable desk jobs where she could contribute without risking her life. Cade resisted, but even she could feel time catching up. She was 42 years old now, ancient by fighter pilot standards, held together by physical therapy and determination. One morning, after a particularly difficult mission where she'd pushed through pain that would have grounded most pilots, Cade stood in front of a mirror in the bathroom and took stock, gray hair threading through the brown, lines around her eyes from squinting into sunlight at high altitude. Scars from ejections and crashes mapping a history of violence across her skin. She looked tired. She felt tired. But underneath the fatigue, she felt satisfied. She'd kept her father's promise. She'd been there for the people who needed her. She'd flown with honor and skill and unwavering commitment. Decision, when it came, wasn't dramatic. There was no incident, no injury, no moment of crisis. There was just the quiet recognition that she'd given everything she had to give, that the next generation was ready, that it was time to pass the torch. Cade submitted her retirement paperwork on a Tuesday morning. Her commander accepted it without argument, though she could see the sadness in his eyes. "End of an era," he said quietly. "You know the community won't be the same without you." Cade smiled. "The community will be fine. There are good pilots coming up, pilots who are better than I ever was technically. They'll carry on." "Maybe," he said, "but they won't be you. There's only one Revenant." She shook her head gently. "Revenant isn't a person, sir. It's an idea. It's the idea that someone will always come, that the A-10 community will always be there when it matters most. As long as that idea survives, as long as pilots understand what we're really doing out here, then Revenant will always exist." Her final flight was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, a simple training mission with no drama, no fanfare. Just one last sortie, one last time strapping into the cockpit, one last time feeling the twin turbofans spool up and lift her into the sky. But as Cade walked out to the flight line, she found something unexpected. The entire squadron had turned out. Pilots and crew chiefs and ground personnel lined the taxiway, standing at attention, saluting. Someone had painted a name on the side of the aircraft she'd be flying: Revenant's Last Dance. Cade felt tears threaten for the first time in years. She blinked them back, returned the salutes, and climbed into the cockpit. The flight itself was unremarkable. She flew the profile she'd flown 10,000 times before: takeoff, navigation to the training range, simulated close air support runs against ground targets, return to base. But every moment felt weighted with significance. Every control input felt like a goodbye. As she lined up for her final landing, the tower cleared her for a low approach, a tradition for retiring pilots. Cade descended to 50 feet and flew the length of the runway at 250 knots. The A